Hey, what's going on, guys? So today we're talking about the best decks of the upcoming format. I got to 10. I'm not super confident about my 10. I will say there's different spots where like I'm like these definitely should be here. These definitely should be here. Maybe not these. And that's why I actually started this list off. This is number 10, by the way, just right out the gate. Sky Striker. Reason for that is that I was really thinking like Sky Striker's kind of hard to play against. Like it's like if you know, you know, but if you don't, like I know they only got one engage, and that's so big. You need to crow the engage. It's like uh and I know it's like they only have one multi-roll. I believe they only have one Hornet drones. Like they're still not in a fantastic spot, right? But think about some of the cards that are really popular right now as far as hand traps are concerned, like Infinite Impermanence, Effect Veiler. Doesn't really do a whole lot, right? Ghost Bell, Ash, they're good, but doesn't really do a whole lot. I mean, like, literally, Effect Veiler Imperm doesn't do anything. But, like, Ash Blossom, Ghost Bell, um, they're not really that great at all against this deck. Like I said, DD Crow, and Draw and Lockbird are pretty good. And I was looking for a 10th deck. I got to 9 pretty easily. So I just put Sky Striker here, if I'm being honest. But I still think it's a very solid deck, and you definitely need to know like what this deck is capable of. The next deck we're going to talk about is Drytron. I think Drytron was a deck that was lingering around tier 2, 2.5, and now it's got a second Ben 10. And there's just certain interactions and certain things that are going to help make this deck go even further, right? Diviner the Herald is a light monster, right? Herald of Perfectionist is a light perfection, or whatever you say the name. What one of the I just always call them the Herald cards, so I don't actually know the card's name. They're light monsters, right? Now, unfortunately, because of the way Drytron and Sky Striker are built, you can't really run too many hand traps, and that's why I'm not really super confident about Drytron. But Drytron and really the next two decks are really just on this list because they got helped arguably the most from the ban list. Like, yeah, there was some decks that any deck can abuse like Yatagarasu or Change of Heart really well. Like those decks would be really good. Interestingly enough, though, I mean Drytron, because they contribute off their monsters they control, they kind of can interact with Change of Heart pretty well. Even Sky Striker can too. If you think about it, you can take a card with Sky Striker and Change of Heart a card as well. Um, like I said, I'm not super bullish on like the first few decks here, but I still think Drytron's going to be a very scary deck. Uh, I was looking for the right picture for Pendulums. This is the best one I could find. I mean, think about this for a second. They're getting beyond the Pendulum. They just got back Monkey Board. Joker's 3. Astrograph Sorcerer's at 1. And searchable by a bunch of things. Um, um, they just got Double Iris Magician. Time Pendulum Graph is still a card. Star Pendulum Graph is still a card. Duelist Alliance is still a card. Pendulum Call. Wavering Eyes. Um, I mean, the list honestly goes on and on. Ignister's still a fantastic card. Draco Face Off. Luster Pendulum. Fantastic cards. And so, what's interesting about Pendulums is that there's so many different ways to go with it, and I think that's its strength and that's its weakness. And I think that's why a guy like Triff can have his channel completely dedicated to Pendulums, because there really is just like just because there's so many different pendulum cards that have so many different interactions. Like you have Amorphages, which are like stun cards, and they have like effects in the pendulum zone, and it's different when they're on the monster field in the monster zone. But like both are stun aspects. And then you have a Demion and Magical Beast or Mythical Beast, I think Mythical Beast, and they're about counters and doing a bunch of counters here and there. And then you have like DDDs, which isn't really a pendulum based deck, but has a lot of pendulum cards. And then you have Magicians and Performer Pals and Odd Eyes, which Odd Eyes, Performer Pals, and Magicians can run on their own separate, but in the right way, they can run well together. And I may have sounded like, if you don't know anything about pendulums, all of what I just said sounds like a lot of mumbo jumbo. But like this deck, like you need to have a general idea of what this deck is trying to do, which is really like use the pendulum monsters to create actually good monsters, right? There really isn't a lot of pendulum monsters that are like Magic Spectre Unicorn Corinne, for example, or Morphage Wrath that are just like walking floodgates, right? But you can get into situations where they can make like a Titanic Galaxy, or they can make an Abyss Dweller, or they can make a Vortex Dragon, and they can make a pretty crazy board. Not as like 13 negates like Triff would say, but like they can make some pretty crazy boards. Like I said though, same with Drytron and the next deck we're going to talk about. Pendulums did get a card off the ban list. Something interesting is like you can use Joker to search Monkey Board and Monkey Board to search another Joker and put Joker in the Pendulum scale and you have a 1 to 8 Pendulum scale. Right? So even maybe just like it's an engine, just throwing it out there. Because when Performer Battle Monkey Board got banned, we didn't have Link monsters. Right? So just like blocking your entire hand and turning them into monsters was a lot harder back then because you had to find a tuner when they had to be the right levels. Link monsters, you can just do whatever you want. So it's just something interesting. And that's what I'm saying. Like, that's what pendulums are. They're just something interesting. This could be the worst deck of the format. It probably won't be. Or it could be the 7th best deck of the format. Right? Or is this 8? Okay. I do want to say this. So, of all of the... This is the line right here for me. Where I think that Tier 2 ends at Salamangreat. Right? And I think there's going to be a lot of decks that are going to be fighting for that spot. I think we look at, the Earth deck, Infitrack Machina. We look at, this is a weird time to do. You don't usually do honorable mentions at number 7, but I just think the next 6 decks are just a step ahead of all the other decks, if I'm being honest. But Salamangreat might be in that category. That's why I think Salamangreat will be at the top of Tier 2, at the very bottom of Tier 1. Somewhere in between there, because the archetype's biggest issue is just now consistency. But that's kind of going away. When you see Mirage Stallion now is at 3, you lose your Mirage Stallion, just make another one. Right? You see Circles at 3, now you can start using the secondary effective Circle, which is actually pretty relevant. And the secondary effective Circle can help you play around Nibiru, which blows this card out. And also, too, the lack of Nibiru in the format and the fact that, Ghost Bell kills it, Ash kills this deck. Uh, Effect Veiler Imperm kind of kills this deck. DD Crow kills this deck too for sure. So this deck doesn't really have the crazy endborns like I said, like Pendulum can make. Even Drytron can post up like 4 or 5 different negates. Salamangreat, you're looking at maybe like a Baguska. A best case scenario is like Baguska, Rage with a Wolf, and a Roar. So but that's not bad. That is kind of hard to play around if you're not playing the right deck. And a lot of the best decks right now aren't really link based decks. I think most of them are that I'm about to say are link based decks actually. But like if you look at there's a lot of fusion based decks that are really popular right now. There's a synchro based deck that's really good. They lose to Baguska. And this deck can really make Baguska really well. They can abuse Parallel Exceed and Ash. You can get Ash over and over again. Now, I do want to say this. Like a deck like Cyber Dragon, a deck like just like Inspector Border Stun. Always got to make sure that you're aware that deck exists. Um, and there's others too. I'm having a bit of a brain fart right now trying to think of like Attic Nister is another one. Decks that are like clearly tier 2 DDDs. Just talking about DDDs. DDDs might be the 7th best deck, of the format. DDDs might end up being that good, or maybe it will be Altergeist, or maybe it will be Paleozoics, or maybe it will be that level 2 archetype that I've been hearing people talk about. Or maybe it would be Not Punk. Is Not Punk even good? I don't even know if that deck is good. Point that I'm trying to make is that Tier 2 is really big. It's always really, really big. And it's only getting bigger. And that's what's cool. Cool about Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that there are a lot of really solid, like Dragunity, Madolche. Madolche legitimately, like in Synchron. I'm curious to see what Synchron looks like with Jet Synchron back. But I don't think they're going to be as good as Salamangreat. I think this is the line, though. Like, I wasn't really confident about 10, 9, 8, and 7. But 6 and on, you're going to see some really solid decks, right? And that's why number 6 is Dragon Link. Now, I think Dragon Link got hurt a little bit by the Verti Anaconda hit because I don't really see if they can. I don't think they can make Dagda, right? So I don't really see what they do with the adventure package other than just kind of use it for fodder. But a lot of their monsters are dragons, right? But the point is with this deck, listen, like I mean, look at what's here. Like, you have Starlied Safri, which is just random dragon support. Like it needs random dragon support. You have Striker Dragon, Borreload, Savage Dragon that are both um, rocket type archetypes, right? And then you have Dragoonides as well. And then Chaos, Chaos Dragon Legionnaire is also in this archetype as well. And there's just so many dragons. There's so many dragons in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's the most popular. I'm pretty sure the most popular type is the dragon, right? And on top of all that, they just got new support, right? We were just talking about Beyond the Pendulum for Pendulums. Borland Dragon, if I said that name right, is a fantastic card, and you need to know how to play around that card as well. This card still has that Chaos Zone, Chaos Space, is still a fantastic card. The interactions with White Dragon, Wyvern Burster, Black Dragon, Collapser, and I usually just call them White and Black Dragon, but I didn't want to do that for this video. Still very solid. Boot Sector Launch is an underrated card. Like, the fact that you can just soul charge with Boot Sector Launch late game is insane, right? And I know Striker Dragon's at 1, and that does hurt this deck's consistency a good amount. You hit the Striker Dragon, you should be good for the duel, right? Not really, because there's still a lot of things that this deck can do, and it is very consistent at doing them. So I really like this deck as a number 6. But number 5, I think if Phantom Knights, okay, 2 players who are both at just as good at Phantom Knights as they are at Dragon Links. They play each other. And the hands are just as good for the Dragon Link players as they are for the Phantom Knight players. I think Phantom Knights beats them. And the reason was, I kind of hinted at it when I was talking about Dragon Link. This deck can run Dagda really well. In fact, of the top 5 decks that are left, this deck specifically runs Dagda the best. And that's scary. Like, there are some decks that can run Dagda and like try to work a way around popping the Scythe on their own, but this deck can literally pop the Scythe. You summon anything, they break sword the Scythe, they break sword the thing you summoned, they break sword the thing you said. You break sword anything, Scythe, you can't play. Right now, there are some decks that can play through that, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. And I think that DPE is just better, right? I think there was a reason why Phantom Knights were running DPE instead of Dagda Scythe, but it could be a blessing in disguise if you look at it, right? Scythe, is it a brick? In theory, Scythe is not a brick, right? Because you look at a card like Cyframe Driver. What are you going to do with Cyframe Driver? You can normal summon it and attack. It's a normal summon. It's a normal monster, right? Destiny of Celestial is a level 4, so you could set it, and it has that effect where it can pop a card, which can work against Branded, right? If you attack with Destiny of Celestial, you can pop their Branded Lost, and they take 500 damage, right? So it's not as much of a break as Dasher or Plasma, but Scythe, you draw the Scythe, you just set it, hope your opponent pops it, and then it comes right back. So in theory, it's not a brick, even though it kind of is. But instead of running 2 Fusion Destinies, a Dasher, and a Celestial, which, let's be honest, people still can run that. Like, people can still run 2 Fusion Destinies, a Dasher, Celestial, 1 DPE. They just can't send it off of Fairy Anaconda anymore, right? So that could still be a thing too, right? And now they can run both. Now they can go like the F-Zero monster, Dagda, Break Sword, set Scythe, activate Fusion Destiny, chain Dagna, set Scythe, summon DPE. And so I think that this deck is just a smidgen better than Dragon Link, but I think it's got a really bad matchup with Floanderies. We see this every single ban list. There's one deck that gets like randomly better because it didn't get touched. Last ban list, it was Prank Kids. Prank Kids we thought was going to kind of fall, but I guess actually Prank Kids got hit by Meow Meow Mew. Right, but technically though, Meow Meow Mew, I mean, we saw what Prank Kids looked like with one Meow Meow Mew. It was a little bit worse, but not that much, right? The Striker Dragon to 1 was a lot bigger for Dragon Link than Meow Meow Mew to 1, at least in my opinion. But Floanderies didn't get hit at all. At all. And that's what's crazy. Is like, this deck runs D-Shifter super well. There can only be one. Anti-Spell Fragrance. It can it can run, if it's wild, it can run There Can Only Be One and just sit on M-Pen, right? There Can Only Be One isn't that great in Floanderies, but it's not bad. Because it's a floodgate. Who cares? Like, it's just a floodgate. You out there impending and summon another monster. But, goes and match rivalry. That's really where this deck can do a lot. And it can run a lot of traps. It can run torrential. It can run compulsory evacuation device. It doesn't really hard lose to Lancia. And that's the thing. Like, a lot of banish decks, like Metaphys, Grand Maju, just like Banish Stun with like Banisher of the Light, like Inferno Tempest, um, Ritual Beast, a lot of decks like that, they hard lose to like Imperial Ironwall or Artifact Mancia. Like, obviously this deck would like their cards to be banished just so they can get their effects and they can dodge certain things, but it doesn't really care. Like, if they're in the graveyard, if they're banished, it would prefer them to be banished, but it doesn't really care. And the thing is too, Flamanderee's M-Pen, it completely counters the last two archetypes. Like, I know that Dragon Link has access to a lot of good synchro monsters, but this card hard counters Link monsters. And that's all Phantom Knights really do. They have some Xyz monsters, just like Dragon Link has some synchro monsters, but Flamanderee's hard counters Link monsters. And Ryza, I just checked it out on my Penny Stock Market Watch that I released on Sunday. It's like a 25-cent card. So this deck, which was already budget, and you had to get a Ryza, is now budget. I think the most expensive card is either this card, M-Pen, or D-Shifter, and neither of them are $10. So I think more players are going to run it just because you can drop $100 and play, honestly, a tier 1 deck. Like, I legitimately think, like I said, the decks before, the top 6, I don't know. Maybe they'll be good, maybe they're not. But the top 6 decks, I legitimately think, not only do I think that these are the top 6 decks, Dragon Links, Phantom Knights, Flamanderees, and the next 3 decks we're going to talk about, but I also think that they're in the right order. I think Dragon Link's a little bit worse than Phantom Knights. I think they're both a little bit worse than Flamanderees, right? But I do think there's one more line, right? And I don't love the phrase like tier 1.5, but it kind of feels like Flamanderees, Dragon Links, Phantom Knights are tier 1.5, and Eldritch, some form of Eldritch, is tier 1. Eldritch has been around for like 3 years now, 2 or 3 years, and it's just always been good. It's always been good. It can always stun. It's got the banish. It's got the pop. It's got the shrink. It's got this guy 3,500 attack, can't be destroyed, and then it just runs floodgates galore. It can run There Can Only Be One, right? And I think if you had to pick, all right, you got here are 2 decks I'm gonna give you. They're both stun decks. Flamanderees in Eldritch, right? And your grandpa's soul is captured in a card, and you have to win this tournament to get your grandpa's soul. Which deck are you picking? You're picking Eldritch, right? And I think here's the crazy thing. And I'm gonna keep it, I'll tell you guys a secret. I think the stun version of Eldritch, with 3 skill drain, by the way, is the worst version of Eldritch. I think the best version of Eldritch is that kitchen sink, Cybers, Red Dragon, Adventurer package, just like Christian Halka Fibrax combos, just going crazy, and just like 60 card kitchen sink deck. I think that deck is still like Brave. That just whatever name you give that deck is going to be one of the best decks of the format. I think it's definitely tier 1. They didn't touch the adventure package, and if you look at the top 3, the number 3 deck I picked was the best deck that runs adventure, right? But if we're being honest, the best 3 decks that run the adventure package are in this order: Eldritch is number 1, Phantom Knights is number 2, Dragon Link is number 3. That's why they're in the top 6, right? And the only other decks that I didn't include are the top 2 decks of the format, which we'll get to in a second here, and Flamanderees, right? Eldritch is great. Stun Eldritch is great. Like I said, 3 skill drain. It's not easy. It's not easy playing under skill drain, right? It's easier than it used to be, though, which is why I think the 60 card version of Eldritch is the best one. But at number 2, we do have Sword Soul, and I don't know. I don't think I've done a how to beat Sword Soul. I think I should do that sometime soon if I haven't. But it's token collector, right? Like, it's just summon token collector. But no, like this deck. Here's the thing: if this deck opens Mo Yi, Zinzang, that's full combo, and that's what's great about both the top 2 decks. Both the top 2 decks They are like 1 or 2 card combos. Not a lot of 1 card combos, but a good. I think you can still do some things with 1 card combos. You can like Moe into the level A into emergence, summon Zing Zang, and if I said that right, if you have any other worm, then you can summon that out. It's like 1.5 card combo, and you can get a Baron, plus the level 8, and a draw. So that's cool, and that's just off of 1 card. Um, Blackout's a decent card. Their level 10 monster is really good. It's a very underrated card. Because I see, this deck's probably the best deck in Master Duel. And so I see it all the time. And that level 10 monster is kind of mean. It's kind of tough to go around. And the thing with a deck like this, yes, we know it wasn't as good as I think people thought it was going to be, but it's still a very scary archetype. And the fact that not only did it not get hit, it kind of got helped, right? Like this deck was running 3 Pot of Desires before Pot of Desires went to 1. So Pot of Desires going back to 2, and all the Sword Soul players are like, gimme, 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 right? And here's the thing too. I always felt like the Fusion Destiny version of this deck wasn't really that great. Um, I still don't think it is. I know they might be able to play it, but I think Tenny Sword Soul is the way to go. And that's just such a strong archetype. Excuse me. I think that you kind of sacrifice hand traps a little bit with the Tenny Sword Soul version, but you gain more consistency, and that's this deck strength. This deck strength is that no, it's not going to do like I said, the pendulums, like the 14 negates, right, or whatever, however many it's going to be. Like sometimes Dragon Link can drop like an Apollosa with 3 and a Borreload Salvage Dragon and another negate and another disruption with a hand trap. Like 8 forms of disruption. There's 7 forms of disruption. This deck's best case scenario, it's like Salamangreat. It's like 4 or 5 different forms of disruption. But what makes this deck different than Salamangreat, one, is that its forms of disruption are a little bit better. Even though the Omni Negate of Rage is cool, or Omni Negate of Roar is cool. The Rage targets, it's kind of not the greatest. And Baguska's not really a form of disruption. It's a Floodgate, which is in and of its own right a form of disruption. But Sword Soul can do that plus a little bit more, I feel like, and a lot more consistently. It can vary because Clazy is at 3, and Moe is at 3, and Tai is at 3, and Zing Zang or Zinlao, or however you say, the Tactician is at 3, right? And Emergence is at 3. So this deck is easily going to be one of the best decks in the format. In my opinion, it's the second best deck in the format, which brings number 1 to be Despia. We knew Despia was going to be the best deck in the format. Not really much you can say here, but other than the fact this card's underrated. This card's actually kind of good. Um, it's not fantastic, but there's just what I love about Despia is there's so many different ways you can win. There's just so many you can do the burn route, you can do the Guardian Chimera pops, you can do the Mirror Jade pops, you can start to swarm, you can fusion swarm, you can swarm the Despia monsters. There's so many different interaction points. My biggest concern right now, actually, and this is like a real thing, I'm worried at YCS Hartford, it's going to be all branded Despia. Because you take a look, like, okay, Adventurer did, even though the Adventurer package itself didn't get hit, it did kind of take a hit losing Verity Anaconda. That was its favorite target. And so that hurt a lot of archetypes. Prank Kids lost Meow Meow Mew, so there goes that archetype. That's why Floanderies is number 4. That's why I'm confident that it's at number 4, because it doesn't care about the Dagadalock. It's Floanderies, right? And Eldritch is still going to be okay. Sword Soul's still going to be good, but we always saw, like, Sword Soul has a really hard time against this deck. So, I don't know. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm checking the results on Memorial Day and Memorial Day Sunday, and I'm like, oh, thank goodness this archetype isn't just running through this entire event. But I could definitely see that being the case. But let me know what you guys think. What do you think is the best deck of the format? Let me know in those comments down below. Make sure you guys click that like button, show your support for the channel, subscribe for even more content. But most importantly of all, have a good day.